taking a look at 7 players that we think have some tremendously high upside, but also some equally scary downside. Essentially, these guys could be league winners or wasted picks for your fantasy roster. So, Dave, kick us off with the first player that you're taking a look at, and it's Jayden Daniels, quarterback for the Washington Commanders. He's got an average draft position right now, quarterback 12 in the 9th round.
Yeah, and we just talked about it in the intro that you can find on the podcast, where we kind of talked about some of the edges you can find to get these high risk players that can really kind of reshape your fantasy teams. And rushing quarterbacks are one of those, and rookies are one of those. And we've seen a lot of these guys moving up over the last couple of years after we've seen success from guys like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, and then rookies who just come on the scene and surprise us with their production. But Jayden Daniels isn't getting that same treatment for some reason. And in my opinion, he's just like the easiest pick that you can make in drafts right now because of the upside. And I like living in that area where you could swing for the fences with these picks, especially when you get into the mid and late rounds where Jayden Daniels is going. Last year, he led the NCAA in yards per carry, and he did that while rushing for 1,134 yards, which is crazy for a quarterback. Of the 197 Power Five quarterbacks that I pulled here, he was first in offensive grade, he was first in rushing grade, and he was third in passing grade. Now, I think that surprises a lot of people because I've already seen the Jayden Daniels as a running back memes. Like, this guy had a very prolific passing attack in college, and he can do that in the NFL as well. He lands in a position where he's going to be with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson, Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott, Luke McCaffrey. Like, there's a lot of good players on this team. So this is a guy who has the rushing upside we want to see. He's got the unknown, given that he's a rookie, and he's landing in a position with a lot of good playmakers. I don't know what else needs to be said. Like, he's one of those rare quarterbacks that can rush for 1,000 yards. It's in his range of outcomes. He's a good passer. He's going to start week one. He's surrounded with good playmakers. Of course, the downside here is the pressure to sack ratio that we've talked about a lot, especially during the draft process. It could be a problem, especially long term. But I'm just not all that concerned. Even if he takes a lot of sacks, we saw Justin Fields taking a ton of sacks, but he was able to offset that with elite rushing output. And I think that we could see that from Jayden Daniels as well. Um, all in on Jayden Daniels as a guy that I'm ranking ahead of consensus, and I'm okay with the downside. Like, I know that the downside is there, but I think what happens if he does end up just being a bust, if that, is certainly in his range of outcomes, it's not the end of the world. Like, you cut him from your roster, you pick somebody up off of waivers, you stream quarterbacks, maybe you pair him with a safer guy like Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, or something like that. But I am absolutely willing to take the risk on a guy like Jayden Daniels in my drafts.
And last year, we saw that late round quarterback is still a very viable option. We've
Mhm.
seen this. We've seen that rookie quarterbacks are viable options. Rushing quarterbacks are viable options. I think the upside is all very inherent. We know. I think the downside, though, with any rookie that we talk about on this episode or going forward, is that they could simply just be bad at football. Like, we've seen it all the time. Rookies that have these phenomenal prospect profiles, great film, and then it's just they can't cut it in the NFL. That is a very real thing. But yeah, I'm with you on Jayden Daniels. I do think there's a fun way that you can, package him with another quarterback, one of those safe guys, a Jared Goff, all those fun names you mentioned earlier, Kirk
And,
Cousins, those
and I
those
think
guys.
and I think you should do that with Jade Daniels. Like,
Yeah.
as much as I like him and I'm willing to admit that the upside is there, I don't think that week one, I'm just going to say, like, Jayden Daniels in my lineup. Let's see what he can do. So if I do draft a guy like Jayden Daniels, the name that you mentioned, Jared Goff, makes a ton of sense. I also threw out Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, these guys that probably aren't going to be giving you top five potential the way that Jayden Daniels could, but you can at least start them as kind of low
Right.
end QB1s, high end QB2s. So I think that's the perfect thing to do. If you draft Jayden Daniels, spend your last round pick on the best quarterback available, use that guy for the first couple of weeks. And the best case scenario is that Jayden Daniels takes off. You can plug him in your lineup, and then maybe that guy that you drafted late is doing well enough that you can get something for him on the trade market as well.
All right. Before we move on to our next player, I want to remind you guys we got tons of ways that you can enjoy this show. First one is here on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/at football guys fantasy. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Drop a comment down below. Let us know what you think about these players we're listing. Maybe we missed one. Maybe you disagree with the guys that we put on here. And I just want to let you guys know, if you are listening to this on the audio, the videos come out the day before. So you're going to be able to access these episodes earlier by subscribing to the YouTube channel. That's going to, especially in season, that is going to give you a massive edge on the rest of your league mates. So make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. Podcast, though. See, this is how we get you to do both. We just keep baiting you one direction and the other because the podcast, the audio side, has an extra 10 to 15 minutes typically of bonus content right at the beginning. So you don't have to go sifting through and try to find out where it is. It's right there at the beginning. We have our fun cold open where we usually talk nonsense, like Dave downing a plate of eggs right before the show. And then we hop
Or
into
every
really
show,
like
actually.
every show. Yeah, you're a madman. And then we get into like the nitty gritty stuff, like the theory behind what we're talking about, and a little bit more of that deep dive. And we do that for a little bit there at the beginning of the show. So make sure you're checking out both the video and audio. Last thing here, we've been talking about it, the Scott Fishbowl spots that we are giving away. Our podcast giveaway is here. Dave, we've been instructed that not only are we giving out the spots for Scott Fishbowl, we're giving out 4 spots and we're doing them right now.
Whoa.
So we've got 4 spots. I've got 4 names. Here we go. Nathan Rango.
Oh, sorry.
Caleb.
Trying to
Yeah.
hit a
What are you
drum
doing?
roll there.
What are you doing?
Go ahead.
What are you doing? You're ruining their moment. Here we go.
I was trying to
Well,
build up their moment. All right,
now I
Alfredo.
need you. Now I need you to do the drum. Let's go. First, we've got Nathan Rango, Caleb Rooster McCallum, awesome nickname Rooster, Niall Little, and Gerardo Cancino. Guys, love it. Thank all of you for supporting the show, whether it's been on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. You guys are awesome. You all 4 have been awarded a spot in the Scott Fishbowl. So congrats and good luck. I hope you get second place or third place behind me and Dave. All right, let's keep going here with the show. I want to talk about another quarterback that's got some upside, man, but he's also got some downside, and we've seen it. And last year, I talked about this quarterback as being a league winner. And dang it, through the first 6 weeks, it really looked like it.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Herbert for the Los Angeles Chargers looked so good to start the year. This year now, he's being drafted as the quarterback 16 in the 11th round. And for, I think, some pretty obvious and some damning reasons, Greg Roman is now the new offensive coordinator in Los Angeles. You've got Jim Harbaugh as the head coach. There is a just severe lack of talent. We all know there could be low volume in terms of the passing game. There's no Austin Eckler to dump the ball down to. There's just so many things that could go wrong for this offense and for this team in general. But since we're doing this whole devil's advocate thing, there's also another side. We could unlock a side of Justin Herbert that we have not seen, a Justin Herbert that runs the ball a bit more. He's got the athletic ability to do so. And in those first 6 weeks where he was the quarterback 1 in points per game, he was running a bit more. He had 3 rushing touchdowns across those first 6 weeks. This is a guy that could potentially do that in Greg Roman's offense. And, I also found this to be interesting, Dave. Justin Herbert had more than twice as many rushing yards per game in losses. And if we think that this Chargers team is going to be bad, well, maybe his tendency is going to be to run when the team is doing bad and play a little hero ball and do a lot of that crazy stuff that we see guys like Josh Allen do in some of these games, because he won't be able to check it down to Austin Eckler anymore. Gus Edwards is going to be the running back out there on the field. There's not going to be a lot of check downs to him. Maybe J.K. Dobbins is back and healthy. Maybe everyone's favorite sleeper rookie running back, Kamani Vidal, is on the field. I honestly don't know. I don't know. And I get it that Justin Herbert's not nearly as dynamic a rusher as guys like Lamar Jackson or Colin Kaepernick, who have been in the Greg Roman offense. This Greg Roman offense, it really worries me. Okay, 7 out of the 10 years that Roman has been an offensive coordinator, his team has been last or second to last in pass attempts. So the passing volume is not going to be good for this offense. But if there's a quarterback who's 1, can be good with efficiency, and 2, add a rushing element to his game that has not been there, I actually really think it could be Justin Herbert. So I think there is some upside there. I think we're discounting this Chargers team a bit too much, but I think there's also some very scary risk associated with these guys.
Yeah, and Justin Herbert, when I watch him, like we haven't seen him rush a lot, and you talk about that, but when he does get out there, like he's a good rusher, and he's also
Yeah.
huge. Like he can run through defenders. Like I don't know if he's ever going to be a Josh Allen type rusher where we're seeing 600 plus yards in a season, but especially near the end zone, that's where I'd like to see him rushing a little bit more. Kind of reminds me of an early career Big Ben. Like a lot of people who have just watched football for the last 10 years are probably thinking that I'm crazy right now, but go watch Big Ben highlights from his first couple of years in the league, and he ran a lot like Justin Herbert. Like it's not where they were scheming up rushes for him, but when he would take off with the ball, he was just a load to bring down. And Justin Herbert is very similar. So I'm with you. I think that we've probably gone a little bit too far on the Justin Herbert fade. Because at the end of the day, he's just a good player, like more yards through his first 4 seasons than anybody else in NFL history, more passing yards. We know he's a good quarterback, and we're concerned about the lack of pass catchers and the new coaching staff and all these things. But everybody's concerned about that, and it's pushed him so far down. What if Justin Herbert just comes out and they throw the ball more than we expect, and he is rushing the ball a little bit
Yeah.
more, and it doesn't matter that he doesn't have his safety blankets there. Like at the end of the day, I like betting on talent. We know Justin Herbert is a talented player. Where he's going right now, outside of QB1 range, is crazy to me. He's a very easy player to draft. And of course, the downside's there, but like I've said with a lot of these guys in regards to the downside, I just don't really care that much.
Yeah, no, I mean, and listen, there's some other quarterbacks that he's being drafted around that I think have some similar upside and downside. I think Trevor Lawrence is a guy who's kind of in that same mold as Justin Herbert. That's another player who easily could have been on this list. I mean, a little bit higher, but Caleb Williams is in that area where there's some high upside, some disappointing downside. Deshaun Watson is one of these other guys. Quarterback position is deep. Let's take some shots, man. Like, let's take some risks at quarterback. Like, I actually really, when I look at the rankings and the ADP, I kind of love seeing Geno Smith at quarterback 23. I am more than happy to take that guy and pair him up with like a Baker Mayfield or something and just get as many good skill players as possible.
Mhm.
All right. Let's go to our next guy here. We each have a pair of running backs, or excuse me, we have a pair of running backs. Each of us have one. Dave, you've got rookie Jonathon Brooks, the running back from the Carolina Panthers, who both of us really, really like him. But I think with every rookie, there's always going to be that risk that comes with being your first year in the NFL, how you assimilate to a new offense. But I think that risk gets a little bit, magnified or multiplied, however we want to say it, when you are coming off of a knee injury.
Yeah, I think there's like a quadruple risk with Jonathan Brooks. So like, let
Right.
me just get that out of the way. First, I'll talk about his downside. He's a rookie. He is on a team that was the worst team in the NFL last year. He's coming off an ACL tear, and he is in a backfield with Miles Sanders, who is getting paid quite a bit of money, and Chuba Hubbard, who was serviceable in his role last year. So crowded backfield, bad team, ACL tear, rookie. Yeah, there's a lot of potential downside here. Jonathan Brooks might start the year on the pup list. He might just never really get up to 100%. But again, I don't really care. Like I'm drafting this guy as my RB3 or my RB4. And the upside case is that he is an
Nuts.
RB1 in the second half of the season. And like if the
Yes.
stars align here, I don't know if there's anybody getting drafted in this range that has more upside than Jonathan Brooks. Like he's just a fantastic football player. Um, but what if Dave Canales does help Bryce Young take that step forward? Like we saw it last year with Baker Mayfield. We saw it 2 years ago with Geno Smith. That's obviously what they saw and why they hired him to be the head coach there in Carolina. Um, Jonathan Brooks was the clear cut RB1 of this class, even coming off of an ACL tear. It didn't matter. He was the first player drafted. Miles Sanders, like I said, getting paid a lot of money, but he was objectively pretty bad last year. And Chuba Hubbard was like just above average. So I don't know if, he's going to be getting a ton of work again. And what we've seen from Dave Canales over the years is that he likes to operate with a workhorse back. Look at Rashad White last year. He was fourth in the league in weighted opportunities, and he was second to last in EPA. Like this guy was a legitimate liability when he was on the field, but it didn't matter. They just kept feeding him the ball. Um, Looking at what Brooks did in college, 48 qualifying Power Five college running backs last year had 135 or more carries. And of that, Jonathan Brooks was graded as PFF's best rusher and best receiver. So, like, this guy is a dual threat running back, logged a breakaway run on almost 50% of his rushes last year, which is crazy. And he was second in yards per route run as a receiver behind only Travian Henderson. So, this is a guy who has tremendous upside as a rusher and a pass catcher. And somebody pointed this out to me on Twitter a couple days ago, Jake Trowbridge. He said, if I remember correctly, he goes, I think that the Jonathon Brooks injury happened right around the same time as the Todd Gurley injury. And I looked into it. Those injuries happened on November 11th and November 14th. So just a few days apart. Todd Gurley came back. He was inactive for the first couple of weeks. He wasn't great for the first few weeks, but we saw him as the season went on slowly kind of get into this workhorse role. Over the second half of the season, he was an RB1. And in weeks 14, 15, and 16, the fantasy playoffs, he averaged 19.9 fantasy points per game. So that's the upside we're looking at with a guy like Jonathon Brooks. Might get off to a slow start, but he has the toolkit and the ability to be just a smash league winner at the end of the year. So downside is obviously there, and that's why you're drafting him in the 8th, 9th round. But with that potential upside, I'm trying to walk away from every draft I can with Jonathon Brooks on my team.
I think the upside with rookie running backs is very real. And I mean, just take a look at the ADP this year and over the last few years. Bijan Robinson, Brees Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, Travis Etienne, all of these guys have been young, recently drafted running backs that over the past season or 2 seasons have made their 3 seasons for Jonathan Taylor have made their way up ADP and have stayed there. And so you're drafting a guy like Jonathon Brooks right now around running back 27. Dave and I look at the names that are around him, and I don't think any of those names really, not many of them, have the potential to be in the top, let's say, top 8 next season in ADP.
Yeah.
Looking around at Jalen
James
Warren,
Conner, Aaron
James
Jones,
Conner,
Ezekiel
Zach
Elliott.
Moss.
Yeah. Like these guys are all almost assuredly falling in value going into next year.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned this. You talk about this every so often, but those pockets, those draft pockets, this is the perfect spot to go and get a guy like Jonathon Brooks. So I'm with you here on that. I'm willing to take on that risk to draft Jonathon Brooks because I think the upside outweighs the downside.
And then you start comparing him to some of the other guys there, like Aaron Jones, James Conner. Like if we're doing projections for the whole season, James Conner and Aaron Jones probably project for more overall fantasy points. And like if you had to look at the end of the season, it wouldn't surprise me if those guys did finish with more fantasy points. But for me, like an investment in Jonathon Brooks is clearly a second half of the season play. Like I don't care what he does through the first few weeks. Like I almost want him to start the season on pup so I could just stash him on my IR spot and open up another spot on my bench. But really, like the play with Jonathon Brooks is that he's healed by mid-season and he takes over that workhorse role. And you're drafting this guy so he can get you through the final weeks of the season and into the playoffs and help you win a championship.
Yeah.
So the other guys in that area might feel a little bit safer, but Jonathon Brooks is the guy that I want to draft, knowing that he can be a 20-point per game guy down the stretch.
And the reminder here is for people that are drafting players for later or down the stretch, like you mentioned, is don't get frustrated if a Jonathon Brooks is inactive for the first 3 weeks. And then, just like you said with Todd Gurley, he struggles the next few weeks back. Because then all of a sudden you're looking at week 7, week 8. And one, I don't think Jonathon Brooks should have killed your roster or made you lose all those games at that point if he's not playing. But then two, all of a sudden you could have a top 15, top 20 running back on your roster for every week there on out. So don't get frustrated with these players. Don't get impatient. Hold on to them. All right. Let me go to my next guy. And I'm talking about Raheem Mostert, running back for the Miami Dolphins, who right now he's being drafted as the running back 25 in early July fantasy drafts, which is roughly the 7th round. The case for the upside is it's so stupidly obvious. Like we all saw it last year. Running back 2 overall, a billion touchdowns. The Dolphins can score from anywhere and they can score often. Raheem Mostert was 3rd in the NFL in rush attempts from inside the 5-yard line. He led the NFL in rushing touchdowns, and he only had, this is ridiculous, he only had 2 games outside of the top 24. So it's not just that there was upside, it's that the floor was just so good, man, because of this offense, because of the opportunity he had. So how could there actually be a downside going into this season? Well, one, I do think just realistically, we have to expect some sort of touchdown regression for a running back like this. 21 total touchdowns is not likely to be repeated unless your name is Christian McCaffrey or back in the day, Adrian Peterson, especially at this age. Raheem Mostert's 32 years old. And the team made it a point this offseason, the Miami Dolphins, to add free agents that they can spread the ball around to a little bit more. I think the team kind of caught this towards the end of the year where they realized our guys are not healthy. We cannot do what we want on offense. And we're really just trying to force the ball to two or three often injured players. Let's get more weapons on that field. So they go and add free agents like Jonnu Smith, Odell Beckham Jr. They draft Malik Washington out of Virginia. And then the biggest name that could be a detractor here to Raheem Mostert is they draft Jalen Wright, the running back out of
Mhm.
Tennessee, who the player comp for Jalen Wright for me was Raheem Mostert. It is an identical feeling when watching their film. You also have to imagine that the role for Devon Achane grows a bit more, and that this backfield becomes a bit evenly shared. And it's all going to be about who can be the most efficient. The Dolphins want to keep everybody healthy. We all saw what happens when they get into cold weather games late in the season. It is difficult for them to pass the ball. It's difficult for that speed to be used the way they want to. They need to be able to run the ball, and they're going to need to have three running backs that are healthy. And I can absolutely see the risk where this team shares all the backfield touches quite a bit, and that the Miami Dolphins do down the stretch start to lean more towards these younger running backs that are fresh, that are healthy, that can create plays. Dave, honestly, it's almost like a reverse Jonathon Brooks here, where Raheem Mostert might start off the season great, but down the stretch, it could get worse for fantasy managers.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to look at what he did last year as anything other than an outlier, and I hate to say that, but it's just true. Like you look at the year before, he was in almost the same exact role in Miami. Saw 209 carries last year, saw 181 carries the year before. Last year, he scored 18 touchdowns on the ground. The year before, he scored three. Like
Yeah.
it's not something that he's going to be able to replicate. And I mean, yeah, anything is possible. Maybe he even scores more touchdowns this year, but I am betting
Just
against it.
rips 45 touchdowns.
Yeah. And I
That'll show you.
recently I don't know if I mentioned it on this show or not, but recently I was just like, let me see like what the standard is for a guy at this age to score that many touchdowns and what they do in the following year. So hopped on StatHead, pulled a quick query for age 31 plus or running backs who scored 20 plus touchdowns. What did they do the following year? I couldn't even find a historical comp. Like there was one guy from the 1980s who did it, but there's nobody who has scored this many touchdowns at this age in NFL history. So the closest comp I could find was LeGarrette Blount, who scored a bunch of touchdowns in New England, and then the very next year he had 3 touchdowns. So I'd expect to see Raheem Mostert regress in the touchdown department. And then, of course, the downside here is that Jalen Wright just carves out a role. Just so much downside here. And again, I talk about wanting to bet on upside with a lot of these guys, and I completely agree with you. Raheem Mostert has upside and downside, but there's too many red flags here for me to ignore the downside. So he's a guy that, maybe he could score 45 touchdowns this year, but I struggle to draft him looking at where the other guys in that range are going.
Just be a little bit more tongue in cheek when you say 45 touchdowns. I don't want someone who was just only paying attention to the last sentence to be like, "What are these idiots talking about?" God.
uh,
All right. Let's go to the next running back that's here. I was wrong. I said we had a pair of running backs. We've got a trio because we got one more here, Dave. You're talking about a guy that's got some pretty good contingent upside. Zach Charbonnet, running back for the Seattle Seahawks. He's got an average draft position around running back 41 here in these early July drafts. That's roughly the 11th round. Uh, I think it's pretty safe to say Zach Charbonnet right now just looks like a handcuff, but he's got all the skills that when he does get that opportunity, it could be really, really good for fantasy managers.
and then I tried so hard not to just like go with handcuffs because like talking about this show, talking about guys with huge risk, huge downside, I could have just talked about like Trey Benson and Blake Corum and every single handcuff here, but I
Yeah.
wanted to try to think outside the box a little bit. And man, Zach Charbonnet, I wish I knew how to quit you. I love this guy so much. He is
You
just
sick freak.
such a good football player, and we didn't see it come together last year. And it was kind of the worst case scenario for him. He hardly played. When he did finally get his opportunity as a starter in 2 games, they were against San Francisco and Dallas, and he really struggled against those defenses. But we see year 2 breakouts all the time, and especially for running backs. I went through last year and I said, let's see what some of the year 2 breakouts were in 2023. Brees Hall, James Cook, Rashad White, Zamir White, Brian Robinson, Kyron Williams, Ty Chandler. Like, it's very common to see guys who essentially do nothing in their rookie season and then finally get up to speed in year two. And I think a lot of people, when drafting Zach Charbonnet last year, especially in dynasty leagues, we were kind of looking at him as a potential handcuff. But that's not to say that his role can't grow on its own going into 2024. I mean, this is a guy that they drafted in round two. They invested serious draft capital in Zach Charbonnet. He's got a great profile. And I'm kind of rehashing some of the same talking points that I did last offseason when I was in on Zach Charbonnet, but he's a pass catcher and he's a goal line back. And those are the valuable touches that you see in fantasy football. In college, he pulled 3 times the target share that Kenneth Walker did. You look at their size profiles, he is significantly bigger, stronger, and he's got more burst, which all bodes well for goal line work. So last year, we kind of saw him spending a lot of snaps just watching from the sidelines, but the best case scenario here is obviously the contingent upside. If Walker goes down, we're looking at Charbonnet as a potential top 10 offense in this revamped Ryan Grubb Seattle team. But I think that there could be one of those possibilities here where not only does he have the contingent upside, but we could see him start to chip in to Kenneth Walker's workload a little bit and have a bit of standalone value. So going back to the well with Zach Charbonnet, we you're going to hear me say this about a lot of these guys, just betting on the talent. I think Zach Charbonnet is a talented player, and I'm willing to go back to the well, even if it didn't work out his rookie season.
Yeah, I think that when you draft players like this, you have to almost look at them solely in the lens of high upside and scary downside. That's the only way to look at them. He is a handcuff. You're just like you said. You're not drafting to be in second or third place, so you're not drafting for a guy to get 50% of the snap share. Like that should not be part of the positivity for Zach Charbonnet. The positivity here is that he could be the guy that takes everything at some
Right.
point. Unfortunately, that usually means an injury to the running back ahead of them. And the downside is like, what if he gets worse? What if everything gets worse? It's once again another player I'm willing to take the risk on here. I think the Seattle Seahawks offense is going to be a lot of fun this year. There's another offense that I think there's been a lot of talk about, but we haven't necessarily seen that change in average draft position from drafters and from rankers that believe that the Seahawks are going to be this team that can score a lot. I think we're worried. We don't know what to expect. I'm excited for all of the players in this offense.
Yeah, and don't hear what I'm not saying. I like Kenneth Walker too, so don't hear
You
me
better.
say that I like Zach Charbonnet, and I don't want to hear and read you YouTube commenters saying like, "Oh, Dave Kluge hates Ken Walker," because that's not what I'm saying at all. I like Ken Walker at price as well. This is one of those backfields where I think the concerns and the ambiguity has pushed them both so far down draft boards. There aren't a lot of times where I'm willing to target both running backs in a backfield, but there's almost nobody else on this depth chart. Like you can project almost 100% of the touches to go to these two guys. So this is one where I'm okay drafting both. And if they're splitting touches, it could be kind of similar to like the Najee Harris, Jalen Warren thing that we saw last year, where both guys were viable RB2s.
Mhm.
But I think that, they're both good players and I think they're both priced appropriately. I just prefer Zach Charbonnet because he is much, much cheaper and has the same upside as Kenneth Walker.
Hmm.
Kenjamin
Hmm.
Walker the third. I don't think we've dropped that one
There
this
we go.
offseason. That
No,
was
we
a
have not.
callback to last
We
year for all of our very old subscribers.
Yeah. I can't just like how you can't quit Zach Charbonnet, I can't quit Ken Walker. It's still
And
no
you
play.
shouldn't. He's good, but like they're very different players. And like these are the
Yes.
backfields where like you can kind of, again, we keep going back to it, talking about like I don't know how touches are going to get split in Tennessee because Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard do all the same things. I think it's pretty obvious that like the skill sets for Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet are very very different, and if they are both used in roles that maximize their strengths, Zach Charbonnet, he should see the passing down work and he should see the goal line work. And then you get Kenneth Walker out there, run him on early downs, and he's got that big play ability where he can score on any touch and take it 80 yards to the house. Charbonnet doesn't really have that in his tool bag, but he can catch passes and he can score touchdowns, and those are both great things for fantasy football.
Zach Charbonnet. Draft him. All right. I want to talk about Brock Bowers, tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. The average draft position for Brock Bowers here in the early July drafts. By the way, Dave, every time I'm about to say when these drafts are taking place, I look up at the top right hand of my computer because I need to be reminded what month it is and what time of the month it is. Early July. I can't believe I keep forgetting that. But Brock Bowers, he's going as the tight end 11 right now. ninth round, which means drafters are looking at Bowers as if he is a starting tight end. That is the expectation here. And I think there's some good reason as to why people are thinking that. Bowers is a phenomenal talent. Might be, honestly, he might be the best college tight end of all time. And I think there are many people who would say it's not might. He is the best college tight end of all time. He's a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. So you have to imagine that the Raiders are going to use him plenty or find ways to use him. He's talented enough to line up anywhere. He's often referred to as a guy that's going to be in that Joker role, kind of a Swiss Army knife where he can line up in the backfield, he can line up in the slot, he can line up in line, out wide, wherever. So there's going to be that versatility with Bowers. He does have the talent to finish as a top tight end. Something, man, I hate to throw this out there, but he's got the talent to be a Sam Laporta-esque rookie, even as the second option on this team. So the upside is there. The talent is there. We've got a guy who can run after the catch, very similar to a George Kittle. He can get open like a Travis Kelce. He can do all the things that we want from a tight end. But here's the problem. Everyone was bummed when he got drafted by the Raiders. And for very obvious reasons. We can't talk out of both sides of our mouth now. We go, oh, he went to the Raiders. But man, I really want him for fantasy. Like, no, you don't. No, you don't. The quarterback situation for the Raiders is really rough right now. The target competition is actually better than we think, or worse, however you want to phrase that. But Devontae Adams is still there. And I know we talked about Devontae as a guy that we are avoiding in drafts. He's still going to get enough volume that it's going to make it very hard for Brock Bowers to be this top 5 tight end or potentially even a starting tight end on the season. And the name that keeps getting lost is Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers is still a very relevant fantasy wide receiver. The team went out and they added Michael Gallup, who I don't know how much he really has left in the tank, but there's a few targets that are going to go his direction. And then the most obvious one here is the team drafted a tight end in the second round the year before, Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. So Brock Bowers goes to this situation where, man, he could potentially be the second or third target on the team for an offense that probably won't be that good with a quarterback situation that's not settled. And mind you, the defense has gotten better over there for the Raiders. So they might be passing the ball even less. So I'm I'm not sure that I want to take this risk here that drafters are taking by having him as the tight end 11. He's being drafted as a clear-cut starter. I don't necessarily see it that way, but I also don't know that there's that I don't know that the upside outweighs the risk. I think both of them are there, but I don't know that it outweighs it, Dave. I'm curious to see what you think because you're willing to risk it for the biscuit.
Yeah, and Bowers is a guy that I think is kind of accurately priced. You know, you made a good case for the upside and the downside here, and I think that I don't have a strong, conviction one way or the other. Like I understand everything you're saying about why he could break out. Like he's just a good player, and sometimes it's as simple as that. You want good players on your fantasy team, but could be a bad offense, could be target competition, bad quarterback play. All those things could be a factor as well. So I think it's kind of accurately priced right now where Brock Bowers is going. I think I might be like a spot or two below consensus on him, but I find myself drafting him occasionally. He's not a guy that I want to like have on all of my teams by any means, but he's not a guy that I want to fade either because if he is the guy that we expect him to be and he immediately takes that step from college into the pros, I don't want to not have him on my team either. So upsides there, downsides there. I'm not sure if there is a better player that kind of encapsulates what we're trying to talk about in today's show.
I think there's a tight end dead zone, to be honest. And I
Yeah.
think it begins Brock Bowers almost be kind of becomes the de facto lead in that dead zone. Right after David Njoku at tight end 10, you got Bowers, Dallas Goddard, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz, Cole Kmet, Pat Fryermuth, Luke Musgrave, Hunter Henry. I mean, these are all guys that people have talked about in one, facet or another as being viable fantasy starters, but it's just kind of a weird dead zone. I don't really see people talking about wanting these players, specifically Bowers. I think he ends up getting drafted where he's getting drafted and ranked where he's getting ranked because, well, who else are we going to put there?
Yeah.
And I kind of don't want to be drafting those guys when we get to fantasy football drafts. Okay, let's get to the final player here where you and I I guess I was not paying attention. I was not paying attention when we were doing these lists. We both ended up with the same player. You had a different player, you changed to this guy, and then I threw in my list of players, and we both ended up with the same guy. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers, and it's going to be hard for us to make a case here for the upside because he's being drafted right now as the wide receiver 68. I guess it's easy for him to outperform that, you
Yeah,
would think.
yeah.
He's being drafted in round 14. So for many, of your standard, default settings leagues, that's going to be your second to last round. So he's one of the last players you can throw onto your roster. So Dave, I'd love to hear what you have to say first on Quentin Johnston.
Well, these are the exact guys that I try to target super late in my drafts because, like I said, like we're gonna know soon after the season kicks off, 1, 2, 3 weeks into the season, we're gonna either say, "Wow, Quentin Johnson took that step forward," or "Quentin Johnson, what a bust!" Like we're gonna know soon,
Quentin
and
Johnson. I want that as a sound drop so bad. Quentin Johnson.
yeah, I mean, he might just be terrible at football. That's the downside. But, you're getting him so late in the draft that I'm willing to throw a dart here. This is a guy who in college was very good and he was a first round pick last year. I don't think there was a ton of expectations for him. The hope was like, Keenan Allen is going to eat and uh, my- um, Mike Williams is going to eat, and like maybe there's going to be enough left over for Quentin Johnston to have some big plays and some spike weeks here and there. But then everybody got hurt. Austin Eckler got hurt. Mike Williams got hurt, and he was thrusted into a role that I don't think he was ready for. I mean, he was an every down player when he was a raw prospect, and they were asking him to run complex downfield routes when he did a little bit of that in college, but so much of his value in college came from just getting the ball in his hands and letting him do things after the catch. So the downside's obvious. He's the same Quentin Johnston that we saw last year. That's the downside. And if that's the case, you cut him and you pick up everybody's favorite week 2 waiver wire darling. Like that's totally fine. You're not spending an early pick on Quentin Johnston. You're drafting him at the very end of your draft and hoping for the upside. And the upside is that he returns to form as the player we saw at TCU, that he's the wide receiver 1 on a Justin Herbert led offense. Former first round pick with 97th percentile burst and a good profile, like all the same things that we liked about Quentin Johnston last year are still true going into this year, but there's very little target competition, new coaching staff, and we don't know how he's going to get used. So there is upside here, believe it or not. I'm not sitting here banging the drum saying that Quentin Johnston is a must draft player by any means, but it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he is able to take that step forward after another full offseason. Expected to be the wide receiver 1 going into this year. You just look at the other guys there. Like I like Lad McConkey, and I think that his role out of the slot is going to be um, pretty nice for fantasy. He should see quite a few targets. Josh Palmer, we've seen him step in injuries in the past, and he's an okay player, but he doesn't have that huge ceiling. I think if any of these guys in this Chargers wide receiver room are going to really break fantasy, I'm talking being like a top 20 option. It's Quentin Johnston that can do that, and he might just be outside of the top 80 again. It might be terrible again, but that's the risk you're taking when you draft a guy in round 17 or 18.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like he's one of your second to last picks, so the risk is not so bad. Just like you said, it's a player that maybe you just wasted a pick on here at the end. I'll make the upside case really quick. Quentin Johnston's got massive opportunity. Again, he had the opportunity last year, like you said. And pun intended, he let it slip through his fingers. Our guy
Oh,
really, yeah. Hey, you're welcome, audience. He really let it. He struggled. He struggled, like you said. He was not a guy that should have been in a full-time role. This was a player that I was not a big fan of coming out of college, and I was a little confused as to why so many people were. I had him as my wide receiver 6 behind Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, Jayden Reed. I didn't see it with him. A lot of people wanted to make this case that he's this big guy. He can win jump balls. Well, he didn't, and he never really has, whether it's in college or the pros. And then he was getting asked to win deep, like you said, on these complex routes and win on the outside, which, I mean, he could do at times at TCU, but really what that TCU offense did was it set up Quentin Johnston to take short crossing routes, all the things that Puka Nacua really, really succeeded with over in Los Angeles. And Johnston was able to do that in the entire offense. Every wide receiver on that team that year, because I remember this from the scouting report, they were all top 10 in yards after catch in
mhm.
FBS. And so there's a reason that yards after catch became such a big thing for him. And it seems like this coaching staff, this front
That's because Max
offense,
Duggan just wouldn't really push the ball downfield. Like, the only way they were getting yards was after the catch.
yeah. But the thing is like when you have a wide receiver that's all he's done and that's all he's really been able to do to be successful, you can't just throw him into a pro offense and be like, all right, go beat NFL corners, bud, because he's not doing that.
Mhm.
It does, however, seem like this coaching staff and this front office is willing to work with him. And that's the thing that happens to a lot of these wide receivers, the Traylon Burkses of the world and the LaVisca Chenaults of the world, is that teams just want to see you succeed and they want you to do it on your own. They're not going to take the time to baby you. We're paying you millions of dollars. Get better on your own. However, in this situation, it does seem like they're willing to work with him and they are going to have the patience. So, just like we said earlier with Herbert, this is a team that we may be discounting the offense a little too much. But if there is an upside to be had here, it's that the cost is really low and it's that the role could be very big. Unfortunately, and I'll finish it with this, I just don't think he's very good. I don't think he's going to be there. I think that it's going to take at least another year of him working through the kinks. I don't know that he's going to return to you the value that you want for fantasy football, but I also, and we, like Dave, as fantasy analysts, like we have to understand, like we can just be wrong. We can be wrong about stuff all the time. I've seen players many times that have just been like, he's not very good, and they make it in the league. Okay, so that can absolutely happen with Quentin Johnston. It can happen with the Chargers offense, and like you said, there's almost no risk to the bad downside that we could see with Quentin Johnston. So I'm okay with it.
And that's it. Like, so often these, like, first round receivers have insulated value for years. And, like, we fell for that trap with Jerry Jeudy how many times? He was another guy we could have talked about on the show. New team, upside, downside, that's all there for Jerry Jeudy. But,
I
like,
don't see the upside.
the upside is that he's the wide receiver too, and Deshaun Watson is good. And yeah, I mean, we won't go off on a crazy Jerry
A
Jeudy tangent.
lot of
We'll
hurdles,
save
but all right.
save
Yep.
the Judy talk for another show. But, like, what I'm saying
Save it.
is, like, these first round wide receivers, we see it all the time where they aren't good and they still hold value year after year. I don't know if we've ever seen a first round wide receiver crater in value the way that Quentin Johnston did. And we do see these breakouts. I mean, I think maybe like Jalen Rager is the only guy I can think of in recent history who just,
Oof.
like, completely fell off a cliff after year one. And of
Weird.
course
Another
he put
TCU
the
guy.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I'm just willing to bet on the profile here. Bet on the opportunity, and it might not pan out. But again, this guy, you're drafting him so late that if it doesn't pan out, like, it's not going to hurt you that bad. You're going to swap him out for somebody off of waivers.
Well, there you have it. We've got our 7 players with tremendous upside, but some equally scary downside. Dave and I are going to be back on Monday with another episode. Once again, we have switched to 3 episodes a week so you can get your fix and get ready for the fantasy football season. We continue just to go through a whole, playlist here of topics. We might repeat some. We're going to update our rankings here on the shows. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, whether it's for the audio version on Apple or Spotify or the YouTube channel as well. And be sure to subscribe to the daily news updates from Football Guys. You get everything that you need to win in your fantasy football leagues and straight to your email from Joe Bryant himself. Well, for myself, for Dave Kluge, for everyone here at Football Guys, we want to thank you guys for watching or listening all the way through, and we'll see you next time. Adios.